So done this piece of work in Perak specifically to put a price of the ecosystem services in hopes that that will help decision makers, or at least asset managers of nature, to be able to make better decisions. Do you have thoughts around, at least from the financing point of view, on whether or not this is helpful to channel financing towards where we need it to go?
Okay, this is a great question. Pricing comes up a lot in terms of environmental and climate issues. I would say my comments now on talking about pricing nature, particularly in terms of payment for ecosystem services, I would distinguish them from commenting about carbon pricing on an international basis. I don't want to get into theory, but it's a very important area because right now there's almost next to zero value assigned to nature. The only value of a forest primarily in the law is in terms of its conversion to timber, as cess, right? That is a legacy of British scientific forestry management where basically nature is heavily discounted and forests are mainly conserved for production. Right? You don't consider whether they tap into groundwater, they conserve hill slope integrity, all this kind of stuff. Now the government, and Dr. Ba is here obviously as former Minister for the Economic Planning Unit, which is now Kementerian Economy. Kementerian Economy, EPU, has been the steward of payment for ecosystem services for I think almost 20 years now. And it's been studied, and I think there was a conference recently amongst the scholars in Malaysia who work on this stuff. We're kind of like 95% there in terms of measuring every single ecosystem. I think there's a desire to hit 100% of the studies before any kind of policy is considered. That will maybe still take a while. I remember trying to have a conversation with the former Auditor General, actually, about this, because when I used to work in state government in Selangor, the state declared a policy of a moratorium on logging for 25 or 30 years, right? Because Selangor only had 30% forest left, already pretty rich. We didn't need to rely on logging revenue like some other states did, so we declared a moratorium on logging. Then we got scolded by the Auditor General for not logging, not maximizing our logging revenue. So there's a perverse incentive in the existing accounting system of government that would reprimand states for not logging. Right? And that's precisely also because we don't have institutionalized sense of payment for ecosystem services, or that ecosystem services actually have value to them. Right? And I think that's very important right now.
Great, thanks, Xiaolong. I'm going to put a bit of a plug. We're working on something called the Biodiversity Bank, which what we hope will pull these values of these ecosystem services, and we're really keen to learn about whether or not we have that data and how much of that data gap that we actually have. Where will this database sit? Who should have access to it? And that this could essentially pave way for something like a Biodiversity Act, perhaps, to give rules as to if development was happening at a large scale or at whatever scale. They need to consider a biodiversity assessment. What are the baselines? How much would projects like that contribute to biodiversity loss, and whether or not developers should pay for a net gain, perhaps, which in some kind of parts of the world is required. Great. Great. We've got questions. I think we'll take all of them at the same time and then have the speakers answer them. Have this gentleman over here. If you could start with your name and where you're from before you proceed your question. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. Hi, good morning. I'm Shamshur from IIM, International Islamic University, Malaysia. A simple question really, because Mr. Xiaolong has been fighting really since COP5 and now it's COP28. It's a long journey, and I wanted to ask, when COP28 is pushing for net zero and this climate strategy, and Xiaolong even said for a just strategy for national climate strategy, how is it relevant to our economy as a whole, to the ground actually? Because at the end of the day, like Meenakshi said just now, it is what matters for us now is the food that we put on the table every day. Where, how do we put the care for the people in Malaysia to say, oh yes, there is great importance of climate finance, and not only to address the lack of salary of ourselves in our daily lives actually. And number two is the goals. Are the goals from COP28, from COP5, from COP1 still relevant to Malaysia's economy and is NETA and NIMP is the most adaptable and the most suitable for every range of society. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe this gentleman over there.
Yes. Okay. So there's been discussion. Sorry, my name is Shamil. I'm an A-level student from College Nopik Alpar, and there's been a discussion on grant-based finance, right? But I think there's a big problem about red tape, such as Adrian said about keeping up with the financials and keeping up with the accountings, right? So should there be more deregulation happening in the government so these communities could get better, for these communities to get finance? And towards a certain extent, right, on the question of innovation, I think the innovation in our country is slow paced because in terms of like energy, it's being controlled or monopolized by big companies such as Petronas. So should deregulation also happen in that sector?
Thank you. And we've got lady on the left, and then the gentleman in the middle.
Hello. Hi, I'm Kuchi Majid. I'm from Bukit Raja Club, a half Sabah city. And we have witnessed an Delta flood incident 3 years back, although it's not comparable to certain areas like Ulu Langat. And being a climate advocate myself, it's very obvious how climate action is very centralized, especially in adaptation measures, where responsibilities of the measures have been continuously passed from one party to another, from the local government to JPAM. And even after attending town hall that was supposed to prepare us for flood disasters, we were lectured on how we should opt for community-based adaptation. Now, there are many challenges and conditionalities in assessing funding, and since the responsibility now has been shifted to the communities that are mostly socio-economically marginalized and are comprised of mostly warga emas, my question is, how do communities on the ground navigate this adaptation responsibility with very little resources? Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question, Jen.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I am Victor from News Indonesia. I would like to ask, basically, this is a finance subject, correct? So we have, and most of the companies are focusing on ROI, which is return on investment. But why can't we just focus on ROV, which is value, instead of investment? Value in the context of value to the environment, value to the health, because we understand from the it was basically a catastrophe during the COVID-19, and that was basically due to the act of our human, and that is what is important. So maybe you can share when can we move from return on investment to return on value. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to take 4 minutes, and I'm going to get each of you to answer one of those questions. So relevance for Malaysia in terms of climate policy, from evolution of the climate finance journey we've seen, Nina, if you don't mind taking that. Grants-based finance, perhaps the question on that, Bani, if you don't mind. The question about climate risk, Fatin, if you don't mind taking that one, and Xiaolong on the ROV. I think 1 minute each, please. I'm going to tap my mic when your 1 minute is up. Over to you.
Supposed to answer. Maybe the question about the net zero and the first question about the COP, actually net zero, in the Paris Agreement, net zero is a global aspiration. It's not a country by country aspiration. It became a country by country aspiration because of the Glasgow, the British, when they organized that, it became net zero for everyone. Actually, it doesn't make sense at all. And so that's why there was this problem, because from a global to a national, as we had said, there is an issue about how equity and the sharing of the remaining carbon budget, how do you use it in a fair way and so on. So I think, I'm not sure where the question was going, but in terms of financing, I think the only thing that I want to say for those of us who are focusing on the conference of parties is Baku is absolutely critical in Azerbaijan. And so we are fighting for the new collective quantified goal on finance. So there is a civil society campaign which has been launched, and we have called it, paid a down payment of $5 trillion a year. If we can have money for wars, you can have money for fossil fuel subsidies, you have money, it's a political will that needs to be delivered. I'm not sure whether I'm answering any question, but I just wanted to say that there's a lot that we have to do.
Groceries, finance, equality growth.
Yeah, energy sector. I think one of the things that really also constrain innovation and also adaptation of renewable energy is because predominantly energy is dominated by few, basically Petronas, DNV, and so on. Because regulatory wise, retail of energy is only through DNV or the state utility. So this is actually a very big issue. Because if you want to electrify rural communities, you have to come up with very different way of doing it. You cannot go continuously do grid extension. The only way you can do it is through mini grid systems, decentralized, and it can only happen if you liberalize the energy sector and allow private and community-based also to join in and provide those solutions for the community, and that is why we can actually enhance and actually catalyze the adaptation of renewable technologies, and eventually one day we'll come back again. Thank you.
I'll turn money for 1 minute. Fatin, climate risk, the question of climate risk, over to you.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to say I sympathize because I'm from Terengganu, so I experienced flood firsthand, right? So with climate risk adaptation, how do we help community-based entity? How do we help community to actually tackle flood risk, for example, adaptation? So by right, it should be the local district or the local government responsibility. But in absence of that, I think there's always, coming from the point of view of as an NGO, there's always funding opportunities. So what the best thing you could do is to approach any civil societies that's kind of operating or maybe covering those areas and see what kind of angle you can go from that. But I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Fatin. I think they switched off my mic. Over to you, Shalom, for the last question on RFP.
Okay, I'll give you a 3-in-1. Okay, rate of return. The issue is that we're committed to capitalism, so rates of return matter. The rate of return for renewable energy projects is about 5%. The rate of return for fossil fuel projects ranges from 12 to 15%. If you're in an institution that has a mandate to generate returns on investment, where will you go? Unless there's a policy intervention. That's why industrial policy matters, and this goes to question 1. Question 2, industrial policy can shape outcomes. It can also create rewarding, high-wage, green jobs. Not a lot, but some, that also generate benefits at community level. In order to generate returns to scale in industrial policy, you do need big companies to maximize innovation. Small companies will struggle to generate the innovation returns that can cascade into the rest of the economy. There's going to be a longer answer, but that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you. Please give it a round of applause.
Alright, that was a very informative session on what we can do more to bridge the gap for a just transition. Again, I would like to invite speakers to remain on stage to receive our token of appreciation from the President of the Fellows Alumni Association, Said Muhammad Arif.